in a broken home under joint custody in the historically and still Mexican section of Great East Los Angeles. My father, raised by the belt buckle, raised by parents who go months without speaking, raised me under the influence of the bottle. Under his raised fist, under his raised voice, he raised a stuttering and shell-shocked child, horrified and contemptuous. My mother, raised with love, raised with encouragement, raised a second-born, a first generation, born in a new country. A beautiful and curious woman raised me with a library card. Raised a boy genius, how to raise his hand, how to raise his voice, how to raise questions in the historically and still Mexican section of Great East Los Angeles. I learned how to love. And I learned how to hate. In the same place, at the same time. By 5, I could quote Shakespeare, roll with the punches, identify the instruments of an orchestra and fall asleep to the sounds of gunshots. Then there were fireworks. The sounds of my father's screaming pretended it was a television under the cover of blankets in the deepest, darkest, loneliest stretch of the night. By flashlight, I learned how to read. Or pretend to be asleep to avoid life. By 5, I memorized the names and terms of all the presidents. It became something of an obsession, or something to someone, just not sure who. By 8, thinking to be proud of me, I told my father that I could see myself at Oval Office before he sat me down and said, "Son, we're Mexican. This is America. This is never going to happen." This is my family was never taught to me. I climbed that family tree bitter and thorny. Heard stories of my great-grandfather died sick. Of the Colorado black man who got slaving away in the coal mines of America. Yet somehow died back in Mexico. Read a book about something called the Mexican Repatriation Act, and I began to piece together what brought him here and what sent him back. With the story about my grandfather and my grandmother was made that much clearer, and I began to understand their entire family had been deported from this country in the 1930s for no reason other than their last name and the color of their skin. And I began to piece together never born at that, never happiness. I have spent the better part of my life understanding that oppression runs through my veins, and that is not a history that goes down easy. So the boy genius who would be president now began to hate this country and all that it stood for and all that it trampled over. The racism that around my mother's father drove its borders, the poverty and the misery to my father's father to become an alcoholic, that bitter legacy that never goes down easy, that drove my father and I to become alcoholics. Yes, I hated all of it. It's mindless consumption, it's mindless labor, the pointlessness of moving a box from one corner of the room to another, the misery of living paycheck to paycheck as a mindless slave to next month's rent in a heartless economy that drove me towards homelessness, and I lost that job. I shot through my days aimlessly, beaten down by the summer heat like a stray dog, wandering the summer streets, and I remember my mother reading me Shakespeare. I remembered all that I was supposed to be. Some kind of genius. Some kind of prodigy, now homeless, and I hated this country. And all that it stood for. A government supposedly formed by the people that had never had anything to offer me but dead. With raw jobs that robbed my time and energy while meaning and value, and took until there was nothing left in this cruel joke of a meritocracy which must be poised, guiltless, and indifferent to lead me to my death. Yes, I hated all of it. But nowhere near as much as I hated myself. And I found myself drunk and debased, barely able to stand, barely still a man in a walking, talking, drunken coma, sleepwalking through a childhood sanctuary. I found myself drunk at the library, applying for a card. But I came back the next day, and the next, and the next, and the next, and I read, and I read, and I read, and I began to see the true history of this country. The real nature of this economy was never taught to me. And never been a question of peoples or borders or a new world order, and it wasn't the white man. It wasn't my dad. It wasn't my old boss or any personal failure. It was no global conspiracy, no Illuminati. The very nature of the global economy, the very nature of private property. I read, and I read, and I read. I read Marx, I read Engels, I read Lenin, and I began to agree with them, and I saw for the first time that I wasn't alone, that it wasn't my fault, that I was a worker, that I was working class, that I was proletarian. meaning of my life, the truth about the world and my place within it was never taught to me. Because there are some things you have to learn for yourself. Thank you guys.
All right.
We made gods and we put ourselves in prisons, but our sentence is up. And we've been looking for the solution, we've been looking for the banks, but the banks are just buildings, the banks are just people, and the money is kept in the banks, but nobody knows where the banks are kept because the banks are just buildings. And the city council is just a building with people in it. And when there's thousands of us marching, those are just thousands of people, like the thousands of people that constitute the transnational capitalist class that runs this world. And our sentence is up. The bars that we've built to confine ourselves are just pieces of metal that have been produced by human hands. And our sentence is up. We can walk outside. It's a beautiful night. It's a beautiful world we all have to live in. We can look up at the sky and we can see each other and realize that all of the gods and the constitutions and the economy and the government is nothing but people. And we are people too. And our sentence is up. We can let go and we can come outside now and look at each other and face each other and realize that when the U.S. went into Iraq 10 years ago, set up detention centers, set up torture centers everywhere, that was just people torturing people. And right now there's just people torturing people, and our sentence is up. We can let go and enjoy ourselves and stop killing each other, and that's it.
All right. Okay, well, next time we're going to have to get the time to set up. Give us a little bit of youth music, Gabriela, and we'll be with you in a minute or so.
Around and see a world that I did not create. It's there because our leaders were so quick to abdicate. To save their ass, they sold us out to push the president. Unelected nincompoop who have been negligent. Push me to war to steal it out and settle on the store. The damage to our country is something we could not ignore. No, all the sound